Okay, this is the follow-up tutorial on Mosaic Pro, building on the basics that were introduced in the introductory video that I did some time ago. This is actually Mosaic Pro from as Imagine 2016, but it still has the same basic ribbon interface in the main Imagine program, and this particular submodule has the same look and feel as the original did. But what I wanted to add to the original video is a couple of extra functions to enable you to fine-tune the output to produce a better product, basically. So what we're going to be looking at in this tutorial is the choosing of a reference image, previewing an area of the mosaic, and adjusting the seam lines in the main, and anything else I can think of that might be of use to you. So in this particular Mosaic Pro document, I've dragged in 4 25,000 scale or thereabouts aerial images that have been rectified. You can see that they have their file names and image borders highlighted. So the first thing I'll do, just to tidy things up a little bit, is to turn off the labels, and I'll turn off the image borders, and we'll generate our seam lines using our seam line generation tool. I'll just use the most nadir. I won't worry about weighting it, and it'll very quickly just run through and create those intercuts. So this is probably a familiar situation that you'll find yourself after you've done that. The weighted seam lines are a little bit more calculated than these ones, but they basically follow the same line work that the automatic ones do without the weighting. The other thing you can do is possibly experiment with your imagery to use the different types of seam line generation to see what suits your particular images better. If the images above and below are displaced laterally to a large extent, you'll find that the nadir seam lines tend to cut up into the run above and down quite sharply, which can sometimes get you to a point where you're actually running out of image and you have to adjust the seam lines. Whereas the weighted seam lines and the geometric seam lines don't do that to the same extent. I'll just remove those seam lines and show you what I mean. Use the icon to get rid of the seam lines. Okay, we're back to where we were. So let's try generating them using a geometry-based seam line in this case. And you see a completely different modus operandi. You've got a great big intercut on an angle between these two, and you've got angles and strange little intercuts around the middle. So it's nowhere near as clean in this particular instance as the nadir-based seam line. Okay, let's try an overlay-based seam line. See what that gives us. And of course my memory has failed me, and that's what we have automatically anyway. Alright, let's go back to our weighted seam lines. Let's have a look at some of the settings for these. We can have a couple of different options of the initial seam line method, whether it be nadir or geometry based or automatic. We can actually adjust things like segment lengths and bounding widths and whatever else. Generally you could set this to say most nadir and run your seam lines this way, in which case it needs to calculate where they're going to go, and it will follow, you'll find, essentially the same path as the ones that we generated a moment ago, but it will be weighted and more intricate in its line work, if you know what I mean. I'll show you what I'll zoom in and show you what I mean. The actual weighted seam lines are calculated upon the imagery and basically produces a wavy line, taking into consideration the pixel definitions on the images. If I remove those, and we just generate a normal most nadir line, and then zoom into that same area, you'll see that it's basically followed the same paths, but they're just basically straight lines. They're not weighted on the pixels for each individual intercut for the images. I'll stick with Nadir for the time being, and we'll have a bit of a look around, and I'll show you how we can actually adjust seamline boundaries to produce a better result. Hopefully, if we can find an area of the images where we have a straight line that's not aligning, here's an example. You'll see if I zoom into that area that the road, actually it is aligning quite well. It's just come under those trees. Quite often you'll get a misalignment where this road might come to about here, this line will come to about here, and you'll have a gap between the two. To adjust the seam lines, you need to use this seamline editing tool. So just click on that to activate it. And say for example we wanted to experiment with whether this image above was better rectified than the one below, or vice versa. We could cut into one of the images and then back into this image to move that seam line up to where there may be a better point of joining. So let's just do that. We'll click on the bottom image, we'll create a polygon up into the image above, click back into the bottom image, and then double click to finish the polygon. And what it will do is, as you can see, it's cut up into the image above from the one we started in, and so now we have a seam line through here, and it's showing quite a good alignment on the road. It's not going to stand out particularly in the final product, depending of course on the colour balancing across both sides of this line. I can actually undo that by using the undo arrow on the menu bar and put it back into this area where you have some trees and variable surface. This will probably show up less as a join in the final product than it would be if we put it through an area of plain pasture like this, so bear that in mind as well. Let's just zoom out and see if we can find another area where we can actually do some seamline adjustments. You notice that the cursor is behaving differently now. It's because this is the hand tool, click and drag to move around. If I click and release, you'll see that I get a 4-pointed arrow. If I move the mouse one way or the other, it will actually allow me to navigate around the image simply by dragging the mouse in the direction that I want to head. And we can click to stop that and put us back into the hand mode. I'll just that's quite a nice alignment too. Unfortunately, I've done too good a job of rectifying these images. There's not much misalignment between the edges, but you can't have everything. Okay, so it looks like these are aligning reasonably well. It would be good to be able to find something that was misaligning quite markedly to show you how we can make those adjustments. Just bear with me while I have a bit of a quick look around. Yeah, it looks like it's quite happy in most areas. As you can see, it takes a little while to rewrite the screen because it's dealing with quite an amount of imagery. Well, let's have a look down here, for example. Say we wanted to adjust the image so that there wasn't any chance of misalignment between some of these trees, for example, on the boundary here. We can actually use our seamline editing tool and run around these trees so that they'll all be on the one image, and the join will actually be in the clear pasture areas. And we can do the same thing in the opposite direction up here. So there's no chance of any duplication of trees and things like that. Sometimes along the boundaries of your images you'll find that you can actually get the same tree showing up twice if the rectification isn't good enough. This tree, for example, here on the corner, edge I should say, of the image might actually be appearing twice. And I like to feather the edges of the images where they join in these areas, because it makes it a little bit less distinct. It's probably not ideal if you're actually counting trees, but in very few cases you'll find that that becomes a specific issue. Here's a slight misalignment which we may be able to do something with. Let's see if we can actually adjust this image to ensure a better alignment. You see it's still misaligning when it goes back to that distance inside that right hand image. Let's try doing it the other way. Possibly marginally better. Marginal, but it may be it's a little bit better in this particular location than it was originally. You'll find that as you tend to go more towards the centre of an image, it's probably going to be more accurate. By the same token, as you go more to the edge of this image, it's going to become less accurate. So really what you're trying to do in these editing of the edges around the edges of the photos is to create a situation where the mosaic image will be quite useful, and to minimise the glaring errors and mismatches between the photos. In essence, a couple of meters here is very unlikely to make a great deal of difference to the final usages of the mosaic image set. Okay, so that's basically how we do the edge adjustments. The other thing I wanted to show you was how to undertake a preview of your final mosaic before you actually write it to disk. So let's go back up to, say, the middle of our area where we have quite a marked variation in tone along this boundary, with much paler tonings in the top images to the southern end of the top images compared to the northern end of the southern images. And that's quite often a situation that presents itself when we're dealing with aerial imagery that's flown east-west, generally between 10 o'clock in the morning and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and in the southern hemisphere where the angle of the sun is such that towards the southern end of the photos you'll find that pasture areas particularly tend to be a bit paler. So what we'll do first is to define an area that we want to preview. In fact, what I should perhaps do before that is just make sure that I have the colour balancing and such set as I did in the first tutorial. So we'll just quickly run through and do those settings now. We'll look at our colour corrections. We'll set dodging and balancing just using the defaults, and we'll set up our overlay seamline function. Just set it to feathering. We'll give it, say, we'll make it 20 meters so that it's a bit more obvious, and leave that as such. And now we'll have to define our area that we want to preview. Now if you look at the process, it says preview mosaic for window on the process menu, and if you click that, it has to calculate statistics. I'll just let it run through that process and stop the recording, and then once it's done that, you can actually you have to actually create a preview box prior to running the preview. So if you go to your edit menu, you'll see that there's options there for creating holes and editing holes and things like that. You don't need those particular options. If you've set your gone through the process of doing those statistics calculation and in the process clicked on the preview mosaic icon, you should be able to just immediately draw the box as it's requested. So it helps if you select the right tool. You have to select the arrow tool to be able to draw your box for your preview mosaic, which is what I've just done there. And the memory fails again. It's actually the icon alongside it. So this is the icon, the preview mosaic drawing box type icon, and strangely enough it doesn't find itself replicated in the menus. Anyhow, we've eventually got there. So here's our preview box that we want to look at, and if we click on process now and run preview mosaic for window, it will actually run through the process of actually generating a mosaic just within the area that we've defined by the bounding box. So I'll let it run through this process and come back when it's finished, because it could take a few moments. Okay, as the process list is telling you, that's done. So we'll close that, and here's our preview of the mosaic. You can see that there's been a massive difference made to the colour balancing either side of those lines through this area. You can still see where the line work is coming through here, and I think it comes down to about here, doesn't it? In fact, it's such a good job you can hardly see where the lines go. So that's going to give you an example of the way your final image will look. I'll just delete that preview mosaic window and reiterate that, because I managed to choose the wrong options. I'll show you how to do it again. So first, process, preview the mosaic. Okay, first time we ran it, it told us you had to draw a box to preview it after it calculated the statistics. So the statistics have already been calculated, don't need to be calculated again. Click OK, select our box drawing icon, we'll do it for a small area here. Draw our box, there's our preview box. Then we can actually run the preview. And this should be quite quick, so I'll leave it go for this small area, and you can actually watch it in real time. Okay, so that was the actual real time it took to do that, and there's our preview box. So I hope that's clarified the issue that I created by not remembering which tool to use. Okay, so let's just zoom in on that. And you'll see that as I zoom, the original seam lines will show up moments before the actual preview comes into place. And let's let that rewrite. You'll see the clarity of that cut line through here, and then it extends through into this window. If you look very closely, you'll see that the feathering that I put in place of 20 meters has made the intergrade between the two images a lot more seamless, and you'll find that, that any duplication of features will tend to be glossed over, for want of a better term, in that particular zone, so it won't be quite as obvious, and you'll find that it will make your mosaic look a lot more neat than it otherwise would have. Okay, so that's basically the adjustment of the seam lines, the previewing of the mosaic. The other thing that we sometimes do is, if you're looking at a particular, let's just remove that mosaic window. How did I do that? I think it was delete the preview mosaic window. If you look at a large mosaic where there's a large number of individual images, you might find that the individual image radiometry varies quite a lot, and that some of the images may have a colour hue on them, or a tonal variation, or something like that. You'll also notice down into the in the bottom windows down here that you have a reference column, and you'll have one of the images will be selected as being a reference image in the in that column. And what you can do is you can actually select an image that may have a better reflectance characteristics, more representative of what you want in the final image to use as the main reference image for the mosaic. And my understanding is, and I'm open to be corrected, that will tend to be reflected in the final mosaic. If you tend to choose one that has a particular colour cast, it will be used as a reference image, and that will change the cast on the colour balancing across the whole mosaic. Okay, hopefully those extra tools will have proven to be useful for you, and I hope that you enjoyed the follow-up to the introductory video tutorial.